All right, so let's talk about a term you've probably seen floating around online, virtual autism. It's a phrase that's sparking some really intense debates between parents, doctors, and child development experts about screens and our kids. So what is actually going on here?
I mean, this is the question that probably keeps a lot of parents up at night, right? We hand our kids a tablet, maybe just to get a few minutes of peace, and then that little voice pops into our head. Are we doing the right thing? This whole explainer is really about cutting through all that noise to get to what the science and the experts are actually saying.
Okay, so here's what we're going to cover. First, we need to define what people even mean by this controversial term. Then we'll look at the supposed symptoms and how they stack up against autism spectrum disorder. We're also going to dive deep into the scientific debate, and then, and this is the most important part, we'll get to what you, as a parent, can actually do about all this.
So, first things first, what exactly is virtual autism? It's a brand new term, and as you're about to see, it's a really debated one. At its heart, the core idea is this. Some people are observing traits in young kids that look a lot like autism, and they believe these traits are directly linked to a ton of screen exposure in those really critical first few years of life. Now, the people who support this idea, they really emphasize two huge points. First, they believe these symptoms are temporary, that they can actually be reversed if you just drastically cut back on screen time. And second, and this is absolutely critical, it is not a formal medical diagnosis. You cannot find this in any medical textbook.
And the term itself is actually super new. A Romanian psychologist came up with it back in 2018 after he noticed that some of his young patients, we're talking kids on screens for 4 or 5 hours a day, showed this amazing improvement when the screens were taken away. But the idea really took off after 2020, when the pandemic basically sent kids' screen time through the roof everywhere.
So what does this actually look like in a child? Let's break down the symptoms people are reporting and, more importantly, how they supposedly differ from a clinical diagnosis of autism spectrum disorder, which you'll often hear called ASD. So the symptoms that get reported usually fall into 3 main buckets. You've got cognitive stuff, like delays in speech or not making a lot of eye contact. Then there are attention problems, things like hyperactivity or just not being able to focus on anything that isn't a screen. And finally, there are behavioral issues, with the number one thing being major irritability and meltdowns, but specifically when a screen gets taken away.
And this right here is the key distinction they point to. With so-called virtual autism, the theory is that it's all a temporary, reversible delay, and that the meltdowns are almost always tied to taking away a device. ASD, on the other hand, is understood to be a lifelong neurological condition. The communication challenges are much deeper, and meltdowns can be triggered by all sorts of things: sensory overload, a change in routine, not just a screen. Okay, so now we're getting to the core of the controversy. What does the wider scientific and medical community actually think about this term?
Yeah, this is the million-dollar question, isn't it? Is virtual autism a real, distinct thing, or is it just a new name for something we already know about?
So here's the other side of the coin. A lot of experts are, well, they're deeply skeptical. They argue that virtual autism as a separate condition just doesn't exist. Their big worry is that these might be kids who actually have ASD, and the heavy screen time is either just making their symptoms more obvious, or it's being used as a way to cope for a child who's already struggling with the world. And look, the official bottom line is crystal clear. Virtual autism is not a recognized medical diagnosis. It's not in the DSM-5, which is basically the official handbook for psychiatry. And that's a huge deal because it means there's no official, standardized way to assess or diagnose it, which leaves parents and doctors in a really confusing spot.
But here's the thing. Regardless of what you call it, the science on how little brains develop is pretty staggering. There was this famous study where they tried to teach infants Mandarin. Now, the babies who learned from a real person, their brains lit up with language learning activity. The babies who watched the exact same lesson on a screen, their brains showed almost no learning whatsoever. It's just a powerful reminder that for babies, human interaction isn't just nice to have, it's everything.
Okay, so with all this debate and controversy swirling around, what is a parent actually supposed to do? Let's shift gears and talk about some clear, practical advice.
Well, if you want a clear starting point, the World Health Organization is about as direct as it gets. Their recommendation? Absolutely 0 screen time for kids under 2 years old. And for kids between 2 and 4, a hard maximum of 1 hour per day.
And when screens are a part of your day, the best advice is to be super intentional about it. Don't just hand over the device. Watch with your child and talk about what's happening. Try to choose slower, educational shows that model good social skills. And here's a big one. Be really careful with platforms like YouTube.
Those algorithms are literally designed to be addictive, pushing this endless stream of fast-paced content that can really damage a child's ability to focus.
So, when you take a step back, maybe the real takeaway is this. The debate over the specific name, virtual autism, might be less important than the undisputed science it points to. And that science is clear. Too much screen time too early simply gets in the way of a child learning the absolute basics of how to communicate, how to manage their feelings, and how to connect with other human beings. And that really leaves all of us with a pretty massive question. In a world that is just saturated with screens, how do we find the right balance between the undeniable convenience of technology and the totally irreplaceable value of human connection? It's not just a parenting challenge anymore, it might be the challenge of modern childhood.